You know, there are some stories that aren't really history. They don't live in the past, filed away in some dusty old book. They're alive. They exist in this inner world where time doesn't really pass, a world that kind of breathes and changes every single time the story is told.
And this is one of those living stories. It wasn't designed just to entertain. It was created as a kind of medicine for the soul. It's what you might call a therapeutic myth, something crafted to help us make sense of life's deepest and most confusing hardships.
I mean, we've all been there, right? Those times when absolutely nothing seems to go your way. When progress just grinds to a halt, doors slam shut, and this strange kind of loneliness starts to creep in. We call it a rough patch, or just bad luck. And it feels so random, so chaotic, and honestly, deeply unfair. But what if that feeling of randomness is just an illusion? What if these periods of intense pressure and isolation, what if they aren't punishments at all? What if they're actually a kind of curriculum, a series of lessons carefully designed just for us, for our own growth? And here's the big one. What if the very force that we're taught to fear, the one we blame for all our delays, our sorrows, our limitations, what if that's actually our most powerful and most profoundly misunderstood teacher? Today, we're going to dive deep into that very idea, the story that's been told for thousands of years. So, to really get a story like this, we first have to try and see the world like its creators did. They saw this huge difference between two kinds of knowing. On one hand, you have what they'd call dead knowledge, just disconnected facts, data, information. It can be useful for sure, but it can also just weigh you down. And on the other hand, you have living wisdom. This kind of knowing, it doesn't just inform your mind, it actually nourishes your spirit. And it's usually passed down not in textbooks, but through myths. And that brings us right back to this idea of a therapeutic myth. In a world that so often feels fragmented and disconnected, a living story like the one we're about to hear acts like a remedy. It's designed to bring back a sense of wholeness, to speak to the parts of us that spreadsheets and data just can't reach. This particular story comes from the ancient Indian tradition of Jyotish, or Vedic astrology. Now, in this system, the planets aren't just inert balls of rock and gas floating out in space. No, they're understood as powerful, living presences. They're the executive officers, you could say, of the law of karma, making sure that we all experience the results of our actions. And among all these powerful forces, there's one that's considered the most significant, the most serious, and definitely the most feared, Shani, or as we know him, Saturn. His job isn't to just randomly hand out doom and gloom. He is the force of reality itself. He methodically searches out every weak spot in our character, in our plans, and he exposes them to the light. He is the ultimate teacher of consequences. So, the therapeutic myth we're going to explore is all about a great and wise king, a man who had everything, who was forced to learn this lesson in the most direct and humbling way you can possibly imagine. His name was King Vikramaditya, and his story, it's a masterclass in surrender. Okay, so our story begins in the magnificent court of King Vikramaditya. He was famous across the land for his wisdom, his sense of justice, and one day, the 9 planets, the grahas of Jyotish, they all appear before him. They have this dispute they just can't solve, so they ask the great king to be their judge. Who among them was the greatest? Now, the king immediately knew this was a dangerous, dangerous task. If he praised one, he'd offend the other 8. So, after thinking for a long, long time, he came up with what he thought was a brilliant solution. He ordered 9 thrones to be made, each from a different metal, from precious gold all the way down to simple iron. He lined them up and declared, whose throne is first, he is first in greatness, and whose is last, he is last. The sun, whose metal was gold, was thrilled. The others kind of grumbled, but they accepted it. All except for one. You see, the very last throne was made of iron, and iron is Saturn's metal. As the other planets took their seats, Saturn strode forward, the embodiment of everything slow, heavy, and just inevitable. And he was furious. He warned the king, "You have made a grave mistake. Soon, for a period of 7.5 years, you will fall under my influence, and you will understand the true measure of my power." The ancient texts describe Saturn's appearance with these chilling details. He's tall and dark, emaciated, with these deep-set, reddish-brown eyes. His gaze is always pointing down, as if he's looking right into the depths of reality itself. He's lame, which represents his slow movement, and his whole presence just screams of this intense, harsh authority. He is, to put it simply, terrifying. Not because he's evil, but because he is the face of unblinking consequence.
And sure enough, not long after, as Saturn's period began, the king's fate turned on a dime. While he was traveling in a foreign land, a priceless necklace was stolen, and through this whole series of fated misunderstandings, the king himself was accused of the crime. He protested, of course, but nobody believed that this poor traveler was actually the great King Vikramaditya. His status, his honor, his entire identity, all of it was just stripped away in an instant. The punishment for a crime like that was severe. By order of the local king, Vikramaditya's hands and feet were cut off. In a single moment, this mighty king, a man of great deeds, whose hands had ruled a kingdom and whose feet had walked in palaces, was made completely powerless. Just a helpless cripple left on the side of the road to die.
But he didn't die. An oil presser took pity on him and gave him a job. His new life was at the mill. Day after day, he would sit on the central beam, using the weight of his limbless body to help turn this massive grindstone, crushing seeds to press out the oil. His entire world just shrank to this one, single, repetitive, grinding circle of labor and pain. And years went by like this.
And then, one day, something inside him shifted. Stripped of his kingdom, his body, his pride, his very name, the king finally reached a state of complete and total surrender. He had nothing left to fight for, nothing left to defend. And in that empty space, a song just started to rise up from inside him. He sang with such purity, such devotion, that they say the very lamps in the city lit themselves. And this image captures the whole point of the myth. Just as his body was being used to press oil from seeds, the immense pressure of his fate was pressing the pure oil of his true consciousness out of him.
So let's just pause the story right here for a second, because we need to look deeper. This isn't just a sad story about misfortune. It's a really profound philosophical teaching disguised as a narrative. And to really get it, we have to ask the right question.
On the surface, the story seems pretty simple, right? The king ticked off a powerful being and he got punished for it. It really looks like an act of revenge. But the myth is inviting us to look past that easy answer. Was it really just a punishment? Well, the story really offers us two ways of seeing the king's ordeal. We can see it as a punishment, an act of revenge, a force to be feared. Or we can see it as a purification, a necessary lesson from a teacher who we need to understand. And the myth is arguing for that second view. The king's suffering wasn't meant to destroy him. It was meant to destroy his ego and everything that stood between him and reality. This is exactly why one of Saturn's ancient names is the oil mill lord. It's such a powerful metaphor for what he does in our lives. He acts like a cosmic grindstone. He applies this slow, relentless pressure to grind away all the inessential parts of our personality, our arrogance, our illusions, our pride, until only the pure, essential oil of who we really are is what's left. And this isn't just an idea from India. The Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino wrote that Saturn's influence comes to us through experiences that force us to withdraw from the world. Things like solitude, sickness, or mourning. These are the times when all the noise of daily life just fades away, and we're forced to go inward. Saturn creates that quiet, necessary space for the soul to do its deepest work. The Roman philosopher Seneca put it perfectly. The path of our karma, our fate, it's already set. We can either choose to walk it willingly, or we can resist and get dragged along. For years, King Vikramaditya, even in all his suffering, was being dragged. That song he sang at the oil mill, that was the moment he finally let go and started to walk willingly. It was the moment he surrendered, not to defeat, but to reality itself. So, let's get back to the story. The king's song, born from this totally purified heart, eventually reached the ears of the local princess. She was intrigued, she found him, and eventually the truth of who he really was came out. And right as this was happening, his 7.5-year period under Saturn's influence finally came to an end. And at that very moment, Lord Saturn appeared before him again. But this time, he was pleased. The king had passed the test. He'd learned the lesson of humility, of endurance. So Saturn restored the king's hands and feet, and he offered him any wish, any boon he wanted. And what the king asked for? Well, that's the real heart of this whole myth. He didn't ask for his wealth back or his kingdom. He asked that anyone who hears his story with devotion should be protected from the kind of misery that he had to endure.
And that right there reveals the ultimate purpose of the story. The king's wish doesn't promise us a life that's free from difficulty. That's impossible. Saturn's lessons, they're unavoidable. Instead, what the myth offers is a chance to change our relationship with that difficulty. It gives us a new way of seeing, a way to see the teacher inside the trial, the purification inside the pressure. It's really a tool for transforming our perspective. There's one last very short story from the tradition that just perfectly wraps this whole thing up. There was once a brilliant astrologer in the city of Benares who was famous for being able to calculate the position of Saturn with perfect accuracy. Hearing about this, Lord Saturn himself decided to test him, so he disguised himself as just an ordinary man and went to visit the astrologer.
The disguised Saturn asked the astrologer, "Can you tell me where Saturn is at this exact moment?" The astrologer did his calculations, looked at his charts, and he just couldn't believe his eyes. He checked them again. And then, with this look of profound realization, he lowered his head and said humbly, "Lord Saturn, you are right in front of me." And that really is the final question this myth leaves us with. The astrologer recognized Saturn in a single moment of crisis. King Vikramaditya took 7.5 agonizing years to finally see him. But what if that teacher, that unyielding, honest, purifying force of reality, what if he is always right here, right in front of us? In every delay, every limitation, every difficulty, what if every single frustration is just an invitation to stop fighting, to lower our head, and to surrender to what is, so that we may finally, truly be free?